So the BBC Director General Tim Davie says the corporation needs to verify very serious allegations against a presenter before speaking to him. It comes after a new timeline showed that senior managers only put the claims to the presenter last Thursday. I find this personally extraordinary. The BBC made just 2 attempts to contact the family who first made the complaint on the 18th of May. 18th of May, they spoke to the presenter on the 6th of July, the Thursday before the story appeared in The Sun. How do the BBC navigate this one, for goodness sake? Dave Mason is with us. Dave, of course, crisis consultant at Mentor Media. Nice to have you with us, Dave.
Lovely to be here.
I mean, what an extraordinary story. If somebody had told you this a couple of weeks ago, you'd have thought they were making it up. But this is where we're at. And it's not just the story, as is so often with these kind of cases. That is serious enough and is still very much unresolved as yet. But it's the response from the BBC and everything that has followed that has almost created another story here.
Yeah. When a broadcaster is at the centre of its own story, that's one never good news. When their reputation and their leadership is shown wanting yet again, it smacks of just what are they doing to themselves?
Yeah.
It's terrible. Only a few weeks ago, you and I were talking similarly about a situation involving ITV. What staggers me, to broaden this out, is that no media organisation seems capable of handling crisis comms when they are in the media themselves. You get the whole thing of no statement, we're not putting anybody up. I watched BBC News last night and they've been trying, and they pointed this out, the BBC News have been trying for several days to get someone from BBC management to speak to them. To get a statement or a spokesperson, and this happens again and again and again. And then we hear Tim Davie.
They're in the same building.
They're in the same building.
Literally in the same building.
They might operate differently, and just quoting Tim Davie a moment ago, he said, you know, the right of an independent free press without fear or favour, but BBC News couldn't get answers to its questions from BBC management for 4 days until he finally agrees to go on the programme The World at 1 today to talk about this, and then really giving no satisfactory answers about why there would be a 7-week gap between the 18th and 19th of May when these complaints were made, and how a corporate investigations team, which is clearly not fit for purpose, did not escalate, and this is the key word, didn't escalate risk issues. I work in the world of risk issues management, crisis communications, media training and all of that stuff. And if they had simply flagged this up, and I heard him call for an immediate investigation into why certain red flags don't happen, irrespective of whether they have 250 complaints to their complaints department about EastEnders or this presenter saying something on air, when you have something that involves a senior presenter and allegations of this nature, that's beyond red flag. That is something that should be escalated to a senior manager straight away. If it can happen in railway firms over customer complaints, it can happen when it's something as serious as this.
Yeah, this is not about a radio programme that didn't address, you know, impartiality or something.
Which they get hundreds of those kinds of complaints. Course. And I heard him saying that, we have 250 complaints across the course of... And of course he's trying to contextualise it. But no, not of this nature.
This is in another league,
It's totally different league.
This is potentially criminal as well.
And I coach organisations and senior managers in organisations in how this escalation process should work. And in fact, I'm just very disappointed they didn't call me back in April or May when I was conducting a course across the corridor from another BBC course in London.
So you were conducting a course about crisis management for this kind of thing.
You couldn't make this up.
And on the other side of the corridor, the BBC were there having a different kind of course.
I was running a course for the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, who do all these kinds of courses. Tim Davie, give us a call. We'll help you out. And I was running a course on risk issues and crisis management, which is how to spot red flags if there's something that might potentially be damaging to corporate reputation, or might be something that you need to assess and look at as a risk issue, whether you apply a red flag to it, an amber, a green, and escalated accordingly. So I was doing a course on this a few months ago, and across the corridor there was a bunch of BBC senior managers and correspondents taking part in a coaching session. They were learning how to be coaches. they were on the wrong course.
So
clearly.
hang on. So the BBC management were learning how to be coaches.
Yeah, to be coaches.
You're a completely separate affair in another. Happen to be in the same building.
Happen to be in the same building.
You're doing the crash course in management. So they should have been on your course.
They should have been on my course. I mean, we should have had, 3 months ago. We could have put them on that course, and we could have probably prevented this whole crisis from happening right now.
You would imagine the moment you get a phone call that suggests that a senior presenter has been involved potentially in illegal activity, but even if it wasn't illegal, it was certainly activity that would probably take you off the air for the rest of time. If that is the allegation, and it involves somebody that, according to the parents, had their own issues with addiction and the like, I mean, it's got all of the factors are in this. You would think you wouldn't need a PhD in media studies to be able to go, that is... You just called it the red flag. That's the red flag,
That's
right?
the red
right
flag.
there is the red flag. Everything would happen. Sirens would go off. Doors would come down. Rooms would be opened up. Committees would be assembled. Certainly
committees at the BBC. It's something that should at least have been escalated to someone fairly senior as a manager within the BBC. It doesn't mean, as Tim Davie said, it doesn't have to automatically be flagged up with the presenter straight away. It doesn't have to go to the Director General. There's enough managers at the BBC, as we know, across the UK.
Indeed.
All it needed to go to was a competent manager who dealt with risk and communication and so on and so forth. And it could have gone to one of those, and they could have decided where to take it from there. But this kind of allegation and complaint is the sort of thing that, even as you said, if it wasn't criminal, it still has a risk to reputation, both for the individual presenter and the BBC protecting that presenter. So it should have been flagged for that reason. It has a risk to the corporate wider reputation of the whole organisation, as we are seeing today, which is awful, really. I worked for the BBC. I know you have. I love the organisation, but these are crises always of their own making. They never ever learn, and they haven't learned from Savile. They haven't learned in the aftermath of those situations how to actually deal with escalation of risk issues, and that's the nub of what we're talking about here. This is what they don't get right. This is what ITV didn't get right a couple of months ago over Schofield and all of that business. They're not getting their risk issues management processes right from the beginning. You can't leave something like this 7 weeks and then suddenly everyone's being told the presenter in question and Tim Davie heard about this last Thursday. It beggars belief. What on earth has been going on in an organisation for 7 weeks?
I mean, I find it... You're right.
It's incompetent.
I mean, you get the phone call or whatever from the distressed parents. They make an allegation. I don't think for one moment that you'd necessarily be on the phone to Tim Davie or the presenter straight away.
That's right.
But you would think that would happen within 7 weeks, something this serious.
You would hope that it would get flagged up to a degree, and also this whole business of trying to get back to the people, trying them a few more times, having a process where you do make a bit more effort over such a serious allegation, to then allow that to fall into the hands of clearly a newspaper where the parents were disgruntled and felt that they weren't getting anywhere, whatever it was, and they go to a newspaper, and then you're faced with a story ultimately that's down to really that expectation gap. This is where organisational crisis, and there's a difference here, and this is important because this is part of the discipline that I come from now, having been a broadcaster and journalist for many years. Where these issues happen is where you get a disconnect between what the public and outside people feel is the expectation of how you should have handled a particular complaint. There are plenty of situations where something happens and it's not a media crisis. It's an organisational processy thing that maybe they didn't handle something right and it can be dealt with. Airports, train operating companies handle things like this every day. It doesn't become a massive overblown media crisis. What happens is the gap between public expectation of how you should have dealt with something and the timeline of that gap is the longer that timeline is, the greater the chance of that becoming a major public media crisis, and that's what's happened here. Had this had been dealt with back in early May, end of May, early June, there's a good chance that the young person in question who's at the centre of this story, you know, they're now more exposed because of this. There's a chance that they're more vulnerable and isolated because of what's going on. And so is the presenter in question. Sure. And also the other male presenters who work at the BBC.
Well, there's another
So
point.
not nipping this in the bud has led to a world of pain.
It's been horrific. And the point that Mr. Davey made, I think, a couple of times is they've got this really good investigation team. And I'm thinking, well...
No, they haven't.
They clearly haven't.
They
Demonstrably, they haven't got a good investigation team. There's a newsroom there. You know, they need to... They're trying to find... I mean, could they really not locate these parents again in all of that time? I mean, that seems extraordinary to me.
Well, one, there's a corporate investigations team who clearly aren't very good at investigating.
Yep.
You know, they've got 5,000 journalists in the organisation who work there. Not that they would turn to them to find this out. It's a corporate matter. It's an internal corporate investigating matter. But that process, and individuals within the team, you know, can't be blamed. They're following a process. But the process is clearly flawed. And that comes back to BBC management and its ineptitude